G'day and welcome back to RC Model Reviews. Today we're talking about wings, flying wings, radio-controlled flying wings. It's a really hot topic because they've become incredibly popular. We had the mini quad craze and now every man and his dog wants to fly racing wings, FPV. So I thought I would do a video explaining how flying wings work and the various factors that affect the way they fly, because although they look very simple, they're actually incredibly complicated bits of physics. And what I thought I'd start with is the basics of how an airfoil or how a wing create, or how any aircraft actually flies. And of course, it is a balance of four forces. There's always a balance. Nature loves a balance. And so we have four forces, and those forces are obviously, and you would recognize the first one, which is lift. So any wing or any aircraft that's going to fly has to create lift. And that lift is there to oppose the force of gravity, or sometimes it's referred to as weight. Weight is an interaction between gravity and mass, so we'll just call it gravity. So gravity's pulling it down and lift is trying to keep it up. So you reach a point where the two balance and you'll actually get a slight descent. In the case of a glider, it'll come down slowly. In the case of a powered aircraft, then the lift will match the force of gravity and you'll fly straight and level if you want to. Simple as that. Now, obviously, we also have a force that's trying to stop our aircraft from traveling through the air, and that is the force of drag here. And it's not a case of, oh, what a terrible piece of writing, how did I do that? It's not a case of men dressing up in women's clothes at all, contrary to what you may have been told on some of the seedier forums. It's, let me write it properly, I don't know what's wrong with my hands today. Drag is the force that tries to slow our aircraft down, stop it. And of course, opposing the force of the drag is thrust. And that's normally provided by a motor. It can be a jet engine, can be a propeller, motor with a propeller on it, whatever. Or it can be gravity, because in the case of a glider, the gravity is actually providing the thrust as well, because we're traveling down an inclined plane, the glide slope, and it's the fact we're traveling down provides the thrust. I could do the vector analysis, but take my word for it. That's how it works with gliders. Now, okay, those are the four forces. So our wing, most important of all, the thing we really have to focus on here is that we have lift. Lift has to come from somewhere, and that's why we have wings, and that's why they're generally airfoil shaped like this. Now, there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of argument over how wings create lift. It used to be simple. When I went to school, it was because the air travelled further over the top of the wing than on the bottom, and therefore, because it was travelling faster, the pressure was lower. Mr. Bernoulli discovered this. The faster travelling air produces a lower pressure, so with a low pressure on the top and a high pressure below, you get lift. The air underneath pushes up, trying to push the wing into the low pressure area. That's how lift was created. But there's been discussion since then, and it's waged on and on. No, that's not how it works. Yes, it is. No, it's not. If that's how it works, then how can you fly a plane with a flat airfoil or a symmetrical airfoil that has the same air path around both sides? And the reality is that lift is created by a combination of Bernoulli's theorem, that is the longer path of the air over the top, plus the Newtonian theorem, which says basically you've got air coming along and it's getting knocked down because the wing's at an angle, the angle of attack. This forces some of the air to be pushed down, and it's a Newtonian reaction. For every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So for every unit of air that goes down, there's a unit of force pushing the wing up. So reality is that most aircraft rely on both principles to work, and talk more about that later. But if we look at lift, lift isn't all that simple. And we've got weight. So let's just look at a couple of things that are related to lift and weight. With weight, we have something called a CG, centre of gravity, normally drawn by this little symbol here. I forget which way it looks something like that. So it's a circle with broken into four sectors, and two of them are black, two of them are white. Centre of gravity. That means that if you were to put your finger under the wing or the aircraft at a certain point and it balances, that's the centre of gravity. And the centre of gravity is usually quite fixed. It doesn't move around much, unless you're walking up and down the length of the aeroplane. The centre of gravity is fixed, and that's important because we have another thing here, the lift. If you imagine that you had this wing generating lift and you put your finger on the top, then at some point you would balance so there'd be as much lift behind your finger as in front, and the aircraft would balance. The lift would hold it up nice and level against your finger. And that is called the CP, the centre of pressure. It's the opposite of the centre of gravity. Centre of gravity is the focus of the force where the downward force of gravity is balanced, and centre of pressure is where the upward force of lift is balanced. Easy, isn't it? My goodness, but it's not. Unfortunately, it's not. Because when we have a wing like this, it doesn't matter what angle we tilt the wing on, the centre of gravity will remain in the same place. But, and this is really important, the centre of pressure will not. because if you change the angle of the wing's incidence or angle of attack, the centre of pressure will move backwards or forwards depending on the shape of the airfoil. That is a problem, and that explains why on most aircraft we have tails. Let's look at this a bit more closely. Here we have a cross section of a wing. It's a lifting section, maybe a Clark wire or anything else, but basically this is a wing that's curved on the top and pretty much flat on the bottom. And I've drawn the two key things here. Here's our centre of gravity, and it's at that point there. And here's this purple area here, this is our low pressure area. So somewhere when we've got as much of that on that side as that side, we'll have the centre of pressure. So let's just say that for the purposes of things, the centre of pressure is here. Okay, so they're basically pretty much in line. And you would think if that's the case, then when this was flying, this would be stable because the centre of gravity and the centre of pressure are aligned, so it's not going to tip down, it's not going to tip up. Simple, you know, the two centre points are lined up so that the aircraft will fly nice and steady and level. But what happens here is most airfoils, most of the regular airfoils we have on aircraft with tails, have a very wandering centre of pressure. So if this actually angles up a bit, let me see if I can draw this in a way that preserves the integrity of our drawing. If, for example, we add a bit more angle to our wing, so it goes like this, you can see that. Now suddenly, compared to the incident airflow, we have more angle. What actually happens here is that on most airfoils, the centre of pressure will be changed and it will actually move to the front of the wing. So that bubble will actually move forward, and that means the centre of pressure, the lifting force, has now moved in front of the centre of gravity. Our CP will actually be up here somewhere. So if you look there, we've got our centre of gravity here, our centre of pressure there. So the centre of pressure means that it will try and rotate the wing around the centre of gravity. So as soon as the aircraft pitches up slightly, it will try and flip right over. Conversely, if the airfoil nose down, then the centre of pressure would move towards the back of the wing, and so it would tuck under. It would nose up or tuck under. So it's inherently unstable, it has negative stability. Any deviation from the perfect angle will be accentuated by that negative stability. And so that will not work as a flying wing. And that explains why we have tails. Let me just get rid of some of the stuff we're not using, such as that new centre of pressure I put in there and the new airfoil. Let's go back to the old one so we can see what I'm talking about. Here we have the balance again of the centre of pressure and the centre of gravity. They're lined up again. If we now add a tail to this aircraft, like so, and here's our tail, and up here we have our propeller. So here we've got an aircraft. And what happens here, very, very interesting. Let's just add a bit of, just put this at an angle because I'm going to talk about something called decollage. I'm supposed to be talking about flying wings, but I'm talking about regular aircraft and stability. This may end up being more than one video. A normal, inherently stable aircraft, an aircraft that's stable in pitch, will actually have more angle on the wing than on the tail. So there'll be a positive difference between the tailplane angle and the wing angle. The wing will always be canted up more than the tail, and that's to give you that stability. This is something we call décollage. It's a French word, which I don't know what it means, but it's a French word apparently, and it just means the angle, the difference between there and there. Because something interesting is going to happen now. Let's say we're flying along at a steady rate, and the aircraft noses up a little bit. But first of all, let's have a look at some of the forces maybe before I do that, because I'm getting ahead of myself here. Okay, so we have lift pushing up here, right? Lift. But down here, this is acting at a negative angle. So we actually have a small force pushing down there. So hang on, have I got this right? Yes, small force pushing down there. So this force here means our centre of gravity is actually going to be in front of our centre of pressure to make this all work. So we don't have that balanced effect before. We have to have the centre of gravity ahead of the centre of pressure. So our CG will be up here somewhere, right? So now our centre of gravity is in front of the centre of pressure. You might think that the plane will want to tip forward, and it will to a degree, but that tendency for the weight to pull the wing down is going to be counterbalanced by this force from the tail, which is actually pushing the tail down, holding the nose up. So there's a balance. Again, I said nature loves a balance. Well, this is all about balance. So the forward CG is balanced by the downward force of the tail. Simple as. Now, when we have an equilibrium, when everything's balanced, the aircraft will be flying along. Let's assume for a moment that the nose of the aircraft pitches up a little bit. Ooh, let's see what happens. Okay, so the nose pitches up. The centre of pressure will move forward somewhat, which will exaggerate the pitch up as you'd expect. It'll tend to make the nose want to pitch up further, but we're travelling through the air, and there's this downward force on the tail. If the nose of the aircraft pitches up, what will happen? Well, it'll slow down because now it's having to it's trying to climb, and more energy is going into climbing, so airspeed will drop. You know this if you're flying a glider. You pull back on the stick, it will go up, slow down, and stall, right? And that's what's going to happen here. If the turbulence causes the nose to kick up, then the aircraft will slow. And when it slows, what happens is very interesting. The force from our tail here is reduced because it's not travelling through the air as quickly. Force from the wing will remain relatively unchanged because it's a much bigger area, and usually it's a slightly different section. So if the downward force of the tail is reduced because the air flowing over it is reduced, then there'll be less force holding the tail down, so that the tail will tend to come back up again because this force is reduced. So it will counter the nose up attitude by reducing the downward force on the tail, and it will level out. It's stable in pitch. If we look at it the other way and we say, let's assume that the aircraft nose is down, the exact reverse will happen. The aircraft nose is down, the centre of pressure will move back, but this is really not important in this case because we have a tail. Once the aircraft nose is down, it will pick up speed. And because the air over the tail is now travelling faster, the downward force on the tail trying to push the nose up by pivoting around the CG, this downward force will increase, so the aircraft will go faster and the tail will push down and it will level out again. That's what gives pitch stability. That's the difference between the two angles of the wing and the tail plane. That gives us our pitch stability. Simple as. And that's why also we have a forward CG. Now, you may realise, remember, if you move your CG back, your plane becomes unstable. We all know that. You will try to fly a plane with a rearward CG. It's hard to control. In fact, it may be unflyable because if you move your CG back too far, say to here, then you'll end up trimming. The trimming will be such that this angle here will disappear. And you'll end up with the tail like this. So now it's not providing any downward force. So you might as well not have a damn tail on the thing because there's no downward force to oppose the thing, because we're balancing around here, doesn't need any downward force. So now you've just got a wing acting like a wing, and when you put the nose up, centre of pressure will move forward. It will make it try and pitch up even more violently. If the nose goes down, the centre of pressure moves back, and it will pitch down even more violently because there's no force being generated by a tailplane in that state of trim. That's why rearward CGs are really hard to fly, because effectively your tail disappears. So you might think this is all well and good, but what about the flying wings? How do they fly? They don't have a tail to generate this force. How do they get that stability? How can you get the CG far enough forward on a flying wing that you're going to have, because the critical thing with all stable aircraft is the centre of gravity must be ahead of the centre of pressure. If it's not, it's negatively stable. And a perfect example of this are darts and arrows. You know, we all have, and rockets. Let's say you know, you go to the pub and play darts. There's your dart, like so. It has a heavy metal front here and a sharp point, and they have feathers on the back, and on an arrow it has quills on the back. Why is that? Well, because this is your lifting surface here. So your centre of pressure is going to be way back here where the lift is, right? So you're going to have a centre of pressure way back here with my purple pen for centre of pressure. CP is way back here, and the centre of gravity is way up here. So the centre of gravity is well in front of the centre of pressure. That means they fly stably. They fly stably because the centre of pressure will not move enough to influence the trajectory of the dart. You throw that dart backwards, try and throw it with the feathers first, and it'll flip around because the centre of pressure is, in that case, if you're travelling this way, way in front of the CG, so you have that negative stability. So if it starts to pitch down slightly, it'll flip right round until it's going the right way. So again, centre of gravity must be in front of the centre of pressure, or you'll have negative stability and your plane will try and fall out of the sky, try and flip around and fly backwards. So how are we going to get a flying wing where we can have the centre of gravity in front of the centre of pressure? One moment, please. Right, here's a wing again, lifting wing, relatively flat bottom, curved top. Why can't we just do this? Let's put enough weight in the nose so our centre of gravity is here, because we know our centre of pressure will probably be about here. Doesn't this meet the requirements? Can't we just say, well, this will be stable because the CG is ahead of the centre of pressure? It'll be stable, you know. What's wrong with that? Well, the problem with that, it'll fly like a dart. It'll go, plonk straight down. It'll just dive because this will pivot. You know, basically you've got the centre of pressure behind the CG, it will pivot the wing up and you'll go vertical and you fly straight down into the ground. So it's not going to work. It's not going to work. We need some way to oppose the centre of gravity. Now, on our regular aircraft, we had a tail which was pushing down, pivoting around the centre of gravity to make sure that the plane didn't do a nosedive. We don't have a tail. How can we make this fly like a plane with a tail? And this is where something very important comes in, and we'll call it, because it is, reflex. flying wings have reflex. What's reflex? Well, it's actually just this. The elevons, or the shape of the aerofoil, is such that instead of just remaining flat, it kicks up at the back. Kicks up the back. That does some amazing things to the whole stability and makes flying wings possible. This is why flying wings fly, because of reflex. Because what happens here is now, if you look at it, the air's flying over our wing. We have air hitting here and producing a downward force. So there's a downward force here, which enables us to pivot around our centre of gravity. The centre of pressure is trying to lift up there, but this downward force is opposing it and pushing down there. Because this is a long distance, you can have a lot of lift. You only need a little bit of downward force to balance that lift and keep the plane flying level. Ta-da! This is our tail. The reflex acts as a tail. And again, if the nose does pitch down, then the wing will pick up speed, which means more air flowing over. And because this is further from the CG than that, this will have a greater effect. So the faster you go, the more the downward force trying to rotate around the CG to bring the wing back level. Likewise, if you get disturbed and it starts going upwards, then the airflow over this bit will drop off, and therefore there'll be less downward force. So the weight will tend to pull it round, or this lift will pull the back up, and you'll level out again. It's simple. There's our tail. That's all it is. That's how flying wings work. They have a reflexed wing section. Well, most of them have, well, they all have a reflex to a degree, but there's another way to reduce the amount of reflex, because reflex, it's kind of like, what? We just decided before that lift was created, some of the lift was created by the airflow coming in at an angle and being bounced down, the Newtonian effect. The air that was reflected downwards by the angle of the wing was creating lift, but now we're reflecting air upwards, because if you look at the air flying over this airfoil, it's going to go doot, 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 doot. So instead of being reflected down by the curve of the wing and by the angle, some of it's going to go up. So yes, we pay a price for a reflex. That is, this airfoil is not as efficient as a pure lifting wing, a pure lifting airfoil, standard flat bottom airfoil. And that's one of the reasons why flying wings haven't been that popular. You'd think, my goodness, flying wings, no drag from the tail, no weight of the tail. Why aren't all planes flying wings? I mean, why have a tail if you don't need it, if you can do this? Well, the answer is that you're losing efficiency because you're defeating some of the Newtonian lift that a regular airfoil can create. So for a given area and a given speed, this reflexed airfoil will not produce as much lift as a comparable flat-bottomed lifting airfoil. So it's balance. You're gaining stability, you're losing efficiency. So flying wings, but again, it's not that simple. Nothing's ever simple in aerodynamics, because a well-designed, very efficient flying wing will outperform a poorly designed conventional aircraft with a tail. Conversely though, a well-designed conventional aircraft with a tail will outperform a flying wing. And that's why you'd think, gosh, what about high-performance gliders, thermal soaring gliders, like that people sit in and fly, real ones, full size. Why aren't they all flying wings? Well, flying wings just aren't as efficient. If you do everything right, then the conventional layout will still always be more efficient than the flying wing. Simple as that. Even though you lose the drag of that tail and you lose the weight of the tail, it's still not as efficient because we're losing Newtonian lift due to the reflex on the wing. So that's about that. But what we could do actually, if you want to reduce the effect a little bit, is, and most of the flying wings that I design, what have I done with my eraser? Oh, here it is. Use a piece of paper. What I've done with most of my flying wings is I do this. I use a symmetrical airfoil like this. And why do I use a symmetrical airfoil? Well, one of the interesting things is that a symmetrical airfoil, or in fact, and I was saying before about flat plates, if we have a flat plate like so, it's just a sheet of foam board or something, they're actually quite stable. Because the centre of pressure moves much less on a symmetrical section and a flat plate than it does on a lifting section. If you change the angle of a symmetrical section, the centre of pressure doesn't actually move that much. And that means that you don't need nearly so much reflex on the back. So you don't lose as much Newtonian lift, but of course you don't get as much lift from the Bernoulli effect. So it's trade-off, balances, give and take. But I find symmetrical airfoils make for far more stable flying wings. If you want something that's just going to groove. Now, it won't have possibly the same pitch stability. It won't be self-leveling because you don't have the same force from your elevons, but it will groove. You put it in a dive, it'll stay in a dive. You can make it neutrally stable, much easier with a symmetrical section, just like on a normal aircraft. Symmetrical sections are much more easy to produce a neutrally stable aircraft, perfect for aerobatics, than a lifting section. That's why all the best aerobatic aircraft have symmetrical sections, because it's just easier if you don't have to worry about the centre of pressure of wandering all over the place, because the airfoil is somewhat more stable in itself. There you go. So most of my wings, as I say, have symmetrical airfoils. But that's the lift side of things. That's why we have reflex. That's why reflex is important. That's why no flying wing will fly without reflex. It'll just launder every time. Right, so what I'm going to talk about now is planforms, because that's important too. You know, the shape of a flying wing. We've got swept forward wings, we've got swept back wings, we've got planks. What difference do those factors make? Actually, I've just realized this video's gone on way too long already, so I'm going to stop it here. I'm going to do the planform issues in the next video, which will be coming up shortly, talking about those factors affecting when you look down on the wing, you look at the shape of the wing, what are the important factors there? And I'm also going to talk about things like yaw stability and why flying wings waggle a lot. You know, look at videos, FPV or high definition cameras on flying wings, they're often wobbling and pitching, and they just don't seem as stable, do they? And there's a reason for that, because they're not. And I'll explain why that is, why there's instability in pitch and yaw as well, even though we have this reflex and it should be giving us the stability we need, why it's never quite as good as on an aircraft with a conventional layout. Stay tuned for that. Now, if you've got questions, if I've glossed over stuff or if I've spoken too quickly, which I always do, then please put them in the comment section below and I'll do my best to address them. And if you want to see any other aspect of this explained, which I haven't already talked about, then I'll be doing that in the next video. If not, complain about it then. There you go. Fixed wing Friday, woohoo, who'd have thought? So I have a number of more flying wings which are being built, and so there'll be some practical stuff too. I might do a few little experiments just proving about the center of pressure issue. I'll cut some foam board up and we'll make some wings in the next video so we can look back at this, and I'll also answer the questions. That's it, rambled on enough, goodness me, I don't know when to stop. Thanks for watching. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. Woohoo, you should have got a video today which only you have got. So in the meantime, time for me to clear the whiteboard, get back to the bench. Bye for now.